Welcome, and thank you for joining our latest episode of the EY Parthenon Geostrategy in Action. This is our series around how profound geopolitical uncertainty and volatility is impacting businesses, and most importantly, how business leaders are reacting and how they can thrive in what we believe is a new era of globalization. I'm Adam Barbina. I lead our U.S. geostrategy efforts, and thank you again for joining. And I'm very pleased to be here and welcome my guest, Mallory Caldwell, who leads EY Parthenon Corporate Growth Strategy here in the Americas. Mallory, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Always a pleasure.
So, Mallory, I mean, we know that there's a lot going on in the world, but most importantly, I think you just attended EY Strategic Growth Forum, and where you hosted an Enterprise Reimagined Summit for about 30 or maybe more than 30 executives. Can you give us a sense of what they are thinking about and how they're thinking about kind of this era of uncertainty and macro pressures, and what are you hearing from kind of the boardroom and the C-suite?
Yeah, happy to do it. We did just come back from Palm Springs where we had the EY Strategic Growth Forum. And within it, we had this Enterprise Reimagined Summit 32, I think it was in the end, senior executives from large corporations. And, they're trying to drive business forward. They're trying to maximize enterprise value. We talked with them about how to make sure their current investments are creating the right return on invested capital, free cash flow, total return to shareholder, however you want to measure it. Are we performing? And then using that performance as earning the right to grow. How do you invest in growth, innovation, expansion, all sorts of things that are coming at them. But fundamentally, they're trying to drive business forward. You mentioned this notion of a period of uncertainty. I think we saw some data that we've got this sort of unprecedented level of uncertainty, volatility, unpredictability in the global markets right now. And it's definitely, on their mind. How do you continue to move forward? How do you continue to make decisions, even in the face of all of that uncertainty? I think the sort of greatest takeaway is that they are committed to leading their businesses forward, even when the paths are not completely clear.
That's quite interesting. I know you shared with me some data from that, where there was almost a split between the number of executives that felt that they were, more optimistic than they were 6 months ago, and almost half were, a similar number were less optimistic, right? And I think that really shows the divergence. And something that I think we've called out and you kind of underscored for me in this conversation is that this environment will hit different sectors and different companies, even within sectors, in different ways because they all have, different operating models. And I think that's been an important in our analysis of there's no one single answer for everyone. You have to do the work to get to it.
Possibly even within an individual organization, the different function might have ups and downs, gives and takes in the way that these scenarios will play out. Adam, you used a phrase a minute ago, entering a new global era, whatever the phrase was. One of the things I was compelled by is your analysis about multiple scenarios for how the new global economy might evolve. There's clearly this movement, this focus on sovereignty, on a little bit more protectionism, maybe even to an extreme of isolationism that you all have educated me about. Or we could end up in a, wide open global markets, and those are really different scenarios. I think that one of the things that everyone agreed is that in times like this, when there's so much uncertainty, so much volatility, that scenario planning, thinking through what are the implications for me, for my business, for different aspects of my business, under multiple scenarios is a wise thing to do. I know that this new frame for the potential models that you have produced is relatively new. And one of the things that the executives in the room were interested in is to get regular updates about the markers. How do we see this evolving against these scenarios? Do we start to see evidence that one of these future scenarios is emerging more so than one of the others? So I think that's an interesting set of dialogues that will continue to unfold in the coming months, years maybe, as we sort of set a new normal for what our global economy is going to look like. But thinking through how is this going to impact me? How is this going to impact different parts of my business is an important aspect I think that executives are focused on right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's really well said. And for our viewers, right? I mean, you're referring to our Future of Globalization report that we recently released. And really what we found was it's asymmetric, I think, like you said, which means that, different sectors will be impacted differently. But I think you hit it on the head that different parts of the business, and we have even seen this through some of our survey data, in that the functions within a business that corporations are either regionalizing or localizing is quite different, and it will look different for the data and tech stack versus what it will be for serving your consumer on the ground, which makes it more complex, right? And I think my question for you, kind of just stemming from that, was, you obviously we see kind of macro pressures, geopolitics, macroeconomics kind of being, we're forecasting that for 2026 to be perhaps challenging, right? And opportunities in that. And so what do you see, what will successful business leaders be doing in that environment, right? You kind of just had this session around enterprise reimagined, but how do you see them, and how do you advise from a corporate growth strategy perspective? You can't do scenario planning in isolation, and you can't think about geopolitics in isolation. So kind of how do you, what's kind of the best in practice for you, and what do you think leaders that will be successful are doing to manage that?
I think the nature of the strategy work that we do is coming up with very bespoke answers for each individual business that we serve. And so generically, people will be discerning potential futures. They'll be figuring out what things are important to do in any scenario. They'll be taking action on those things. For the things that are good only for one scenario or another, they'll be looking for the markers to say, okay, we've now gone far enough down the path that it's now starting to seem pretty realistic or pretty reliable that this will be a feature of the new global economy, the new scenario that we're operating under. And therefore, now I've hit a trigger to take action. That's generically how I think we think about it. The individual actions could be very different by sector, as you say, or by individual company within the sector. One of the things that we talked about a fair amount at this conference is the rapid change that we see in the world of technology, artificial intelligence in particular, multiple kinds of artificial intelligence, whether you're deploying agentic AI for the sake of efficiencies and automation of tasks, or whether you're looking at neurosymbolic AI and using it for growth. This change in the environment and in the ecosystems around AI is a big feature. Okay, so then you start thinking about how does that pair with this notion of sovereignty and data sovereignty, and what access will I as an organization have to the data components that I need in order to take advantage of the artificial intelligence, and then the trustworthiness and the reliability. So one of the organizations we were talking to was talking about doing transactions to secure their data sources. You could think about it as vertical integration or as a supply chain acquisition to secure their supply. But in this case, their supply is data, which I think is a really interesting world that we're living in where AI is going to play such an important part. And then marry that with this notion of data sovereignty and potentially access to the data you need to really drive your business. And how do you then secure access? So, as one example of specific actions people might be taking, I thought that was an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic example. I mean, I think we've certainly seen, some of the geopolitical triggers that we've seen over the last couple of years are driving, you have to reimagine part of your business model, right? Because it may not be allowed to operate in certain markets, or it may need to operate in decoupled markets. But certainly it's also forcing this idea of more joint ventures and more strategic relationships, in some ways to mitigate risk, but also to kind of capture the upside in a more uncertain environment. That's quite helpful. Mallory, I know you spend a lot of time in the healthcare sector, which is obviously domestic to the U.S., but has a lot of implications, and is obviously impacted by global geopolitics and supply chains. I was just wondering if you could maybe share some of your wisdom on how you're seeing the industry evolve, but also handle some of these issues, and where you see kind of strategy going for the healthcare sector.
You know, this the story is really a lot like the conversation we've been having already. The healthcare sector is a little different. It's delivered locally. In the US, 85% of the care that's delivered is delivered by not for profit organizations who have a mission rather than a profit maximization orientation. But the way that these scenarios are playing out is very much the same. We've had a lot of change just lately with the new administration and policies that are coming in to play that will change the way that healthcare is funded. Every organization is then thinking about what are the impacts on me and how do I make sure that I'm driving on my current operations the right kind of financial success to create a financially sustainable model so that I can continue to provide care, continue to do research, and make a better future, healthier world for the communities that I serve. So that's what they're up to. Of course, the making sure you're performing as well as you can on existing operations has classic cost cutting elements to it. And of course, every business is trying to think about how to do it as efficiently as you can. I mean, that's true across the globe, across whether you're for profit, not for profit, healthcare, or industrial products. That's a feature. There's also a common theme around productivity. How do I make sure that I'm getting as many patients through my fixed care chassis as I can, caring for as many people on the fixed cost base as I can? Again, parallels to the for profit manufacturing world, just the same. In healthcare, there's a unique aspect of making sure that you're getting them through the chassis in the right place, making sure that you've got them in the lowest cost setting possible for that's appropriate for their care needs. So that's making sure that low acuity needs don't show up in high acuity, really expensive settings at the wrong ratios. So these things are playing out so that you can create the space, the financial sustainability to keep providing the care and doing the research, but so that you can also invest in a future care model that's different from the one we've got today. Ultimately, the game is how do I get people to be in a place of health and wellness where their chronic conditions are managed without acute episodes and they stay out of the system rather than needing to come in and access the systems. That is the long-term view, but that's going to take massive investment in changing the way that the care systems are built, the way that the legal structures of the individual entities relate to one another. It's a big investment in innovation and change that is in front of us in healthcare, and that's what is on people's minds. They're trying to create care not just for tomorrow, but for the next decades and century. And so executives, just like the conversation we've been having, are facing all of this uncertainty, facing the volatile dynamics, and they're making decisions. How do we continue to keep moving forward toward this future that we think will be a better, healthier, more sustainable future for everybody?
Yeah. It's fascinating. Thank you. I mean, Mallory, thank you for this conversation, right? I always learn something when we talk. I mean, some of the takeaways from this conversation are that in this new era of globalization and this future of globalization that we talk about, I mean, I think one requires innovation, and you've talked about kind of that mindset. It
Sure.
clearly requires thinking about, scenarios and doing that, but not just doing them in isolation. And something we didn't talk about was really, but the governance around this, right? Because this is a whole of organization effort
Yeah.
in terms of kind of managing for the future. And so I thank you very much for your thoughts. I thank our viewers for joining us on this latest episode of Geostrategy in Action. And we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Always a pleasure.